As time moves forward, as technology changes and grows, as the infrastructure of companies continue to ebb and flow, one thing remains the same. A leader has to produce. This is the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast, a transformational leadership approach that's centered around three core concepts: vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity. On this show, you'll learn how to be open and honest with yourself and with others, while also developing trust, empathy, and respect within your team. You'll learn how to empower them to take ownership of their roles and responsibilities. This is the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. And now your host, Edward E. Mosley Jr.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Edward E. Mosley Jr., your host of the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. And today we have another great episode for you. Coming to the stage, coming as a guest today, we have Mr. Brian Downs, who I believe is going to be a great guest today with some exciting concepts that I think we're going to get into. I really hope we get into. And without further ado, we'll bring Brian on. Hey, Brian, you there?
Hey, Edward, how you doing?
I am good, man. How you been?
Really well, really well. Apart from the rain here in Ireland, I'm really well.
Got it. Yeah. Like I told you before, man, that Ireland is one of the places I'm going to bring my golf clubs, and I'm going to have a great time in Ireland, man.
And you will be made very welcome here, I assure you.
Yeah. Now, I don't know about, what do you call is it kilts?
Oh, well, that's Scotland. So yeah, okay. Scotland do kilts.
Right.
Yeah. We have a version here, but it's Scotland are known for their kilts. We're known for Guinness and golf courses.
Got it. So, you know what we're talking about today. We're talking about leadership, all things leadership. Mm-hmm. And, just kind of give us a little bit about yourself. And in doing so, tell us your perception, your interpretation of leadership, what that looks like.
Sure. So now I am a speaker, facilitator, and I do a lot of work in team development, and integral parts of that are developing leaders and leadership capability as well as developing performance. And I've been doing this for 14 years now. My background, I have a strong background in competitive sport and also in business. So, would have grown a business to about 3,500 people and, across a number of different industries. And obviously the sporting part of me, there's that competitive side, I guess. And I've taken an awful lot from sport into the work I do now. So to talk about leadership, I think leadership it's so important. It's crucial to a company's success. And my leadership philosophy is really simple: don't be an asshole. Now that sounds catchy, but it's one of these things that I think is an inch wide but a mile deep. And this is about being a strong communicator, keeping your ego in check. And being able to hold people accountable. So, you talk about, vulnerability, transparency, authenticity. Those three things are key to this also. But it requires leaders to do deep work. It requires them to be able to take a long, hard look in the mirror and to be able to assess themselves and say, okay, I wasn't an asshole today. And a big part of the reason that I use this as a philosophy is I was the asshole. I was that guy for a period, and I had to do the deep work to find a better way to connect with people and engage with people, because at the end of the day, we're humans leading humans, and this is all about relationships. It's all about connection, and you can't connect if you haven't done the work on yourself. So in a nutshell, that's where I come from on it.
Yeah, I want to agree with you there. And when you say, don't be an asshole, to me, one of the things that I really focus on when I talk to leaders and things of that nature in coaching and mentoring is self-discovery. And
Mm-hmm.
I put it in the context of, if you don't know yourself, if the leader doesn't know himself, then they just may be the asshole. They just don't know, and so you can't lead people unless you know yourself.
Agreed.
Um,
Yeah, and I think the concepts of emotional intelligence are really important here. The 4 dimensions of emotional intelligence, and it's often been said it's the most important set of leadership skills that there is. I wouldn't disagree in the slightest, because that is what humans being about. And there's a remarkable number of people in leadership that are not emotionally intelligent,
yeah.
and that is worrying, right? So, I mean, if you think, one of the biggest leadership challenges that we have is employee engagement.
Hmm.
Do their survey every year, and I think the percentage of actively engaged employees is in the low 30s, 30%,
Yeah.
and I think that's embarrassing, because engagement shouldn't be hard. It really shouldn't. Again, it's connecting with people. It's giving people a reason to come to work. It's helping them create meaning and belonging. But that takes some deep work on the leader's part to be able to do that, to be able to connect with other humans. Um, and it's a big problem.
Yeah, and I think the other another aspect of that is high employee turnover rate.
Yes.
When you look at low engagement, high turnover rate, I think you bring a great point, because all of this writing is on the wall. High turnover rates, low employee engagement, um, performance level. You know, but then what I like to always sit back and look at is, why is it that the data is showing us that, but we're only looking at it from the employee perspective and not the leader perspective? Because
Mm-hmm.
the leader has a lot to do with each of those. There's even more areas, but um, that's crucial. That's crucial, and we're not. You know, Go ahead.
These are leadership problems. These are
Yes.
problems that
Yep.
leadership should be addressing. Full
Yep.
stop. And so, I mean, you talk about employee turnover, retention rates, attrition rates. Think of the cost associated with that.
Yeah.
Think of the money that the companies are spending uh, on retraining people, hiring people, that replacing people that have left, and and they're spending all that money because they don't want to confront a, a fairly simple leadership issue. Now, it's not easy to do, but it is simple. They could spend that money on developing leaders and developing their emotional intelligence and helping them to get to know themselves.
Hmm.
But instead, they'll spend it on replacing people. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. And one of the stats that I think it was oh man, I don't want to misquote it. Pew Research. I think it was an article in the Pew Research. They did a study and they said that a lot of organizations are going back to a top down approach, and so you're with a top down approach. And then it also stated that there's about a 80% chance that most of your supervisors and your leaders are not getting leadership development for at least 9 years of being in leadership. Now think of that as, how many people have you impacted in 9 years? You did at least
Mm-hmm.
nine. If you're doing performance appraisals, if you do annually performance appraisals, you did at least nine on one individual. And
Yep.
depending on how many employees that work directly for you, you've impacted them in some kind of way. And potentially, because you're the asshole leader, you've probably negatively impacted them, and now they're looking at going to leaving the organization.
Yep.
So
And
why? So the question is, why do we have managers leading people and not keeping them in leading to manage projects?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one of the reasons is people in decision making roles around leadership development are looking at the cost of developing leaders and saying, "Oh no, it's not worth it." I think that's one aspect of it, but I think the bigger aspect is that it's kind of scary. It's a tough thing to have to do. It is it's framed as a soft skill, but it's not. It's a hard skill. Doing the work to become a leader that has a positive and lasting impact on people, that takes work, and that's really, really hard work. So I think that, look, they're probably two of the big reasons. I suppose another reason might be that there's a lot of people in the leadership development space, right? People like us who are want to help leaders develop, and how to put this, the standards are mixed. So, some people are very, very good. There's a lot of people that aren't so good, and that's part of the problem. I think to an extent, but something needs to change. The world of work needs to change, because rates of attrition they're higher than they've ever been. I mean, recently, in the last couple of years, we had the quiet quitting thing that happened, and I don't blame people. They were upset and annoyed and all of these things, but it didn't have to be that way. And when you see, I think this was probably 2 years ago when a number of the tech companies decided that they were going to let people go, and how that was done. So you had, certainly here in Ireland, I can relay some of the stories from here. One tech company didn't tell people directly. They disabled their access card to the building. Other people's laptops were shut down, and they got on the screen was a message that they had to return their laptop. Other people got an email. And you got to ask yourself, in what kind of a world is that good leadership? It's one of the toughest conversations you'll ever have to have with an employee. That granted, I mean, I've had to let people go in the past, and it's a horrible thing to have to do. But it still has to be done in the right way. You can't just send somebody an email and say, "Yeah, your job is gone, and here's your severance package."
Yeah, I think it's really bad, and I think one of the reasons or ways I think what it stems from is, if you look at pre-COVID, everybody operated in this traditional, in the building, authoritative type style of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And now we get into COVID, and it forced organizations, it forced people to operate differently. Mm-hmm. And now you come out of COVID, we're calling this the modern work environment, the modern landscape. Brian, what I think is a lot of organizations do not know how to pivot. They don't know how to go from this hybrid, flexed work environment, workspace, work-life balance, health and wellness type environment, because they're so used to, for the last 40, 100 plus years, operating in this structure of, I need people in the office 9 to 5. Some organizations are working 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours a day. And so now you're into this modern work environment where everything is hybrid and can be virtual. They don't understand. They did not pivot to this new modern work environment. So, you brought up some great points. How do we get organizations to pivot? How do we get them to pivot when it comes to, like you say, leadership development, training development, retention? How do we get the CEOs to pivot?
Well, look, we've got to make the business case, right? And I think around leadership development, this is a tough one. It is a tough one. I talk to senior leaders in companies all the time, and I can go into a company and present my case, present myself well, because I know what I'm talking about. I've done it. I've been in their shoes, and they'll get it to an extent. I think a big part of the problem is that we've got people in senior positions who didn't get developed. They didn't get leadership development formally. And, they're kind of saying, well, look, I didn't need it. Look at me, I'm fine. Okay, maybe they're not fine, but they are where they are, and they've done well. So we've got to make the case better. We've got to present our case better and say, look, the world of work is in trouble. Now, I mean, another way to think about this is that, senior leaders could be forced to do this. So the younger populations coming through, I think it's a Gen Z are coming through right now. People in their early 20s and right up to their 30s are less tolerant of poor leadership than people in my generation were.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a very positive thing. I really do, because I think that's forcing leaders to think again about how they're developing their leaders. I've had the privilege of working on some graduate programs with some really, really sharp grads who are coming out of college, and they've got ideas. They want to lead. They're hungry to lead. They need some shaping and molding, but the raw ingredients are there. So I am hopeful for the future, right? But we still have a generation of leaders there that wouldn't have had that formal development, or it may well have been very theoretical, and what we need is that theory to match the practice. So I do think it's likely to change, but that's going to take a number of years now to wash through, and we still have this problem now. And I do think there are more at this stage looking at the cost of poor employee engagement, right? And that the cost of that is poor performance, higher turnover. And they're looking at that and saying, we really need to do something about this. And they're looking then towards people like us to come in and help develop teams, help develop culture, help develop leaders. But it's still happening really, really slowly. Other than making that case stronger, I don't have an answer on how we're going to change this, other than the environment and the economics and the job markets are going to change it for them. Excuse me.
Yeah,
because it's going to get harder to hire, right?
Right, it is, and that's where I was actually finna say. Now you bring a great case, right? You have a great point, and the thing I want to add into that is, you have some organizations, some leaders that maybe did not get formal training, or are hesitant to receive training, but at the same time, technology is moving. Now we have AI. AI is here. It's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And when we look at data analytics, and I know you have experience in that, how do we integrate data analytics into this fast-paced modern environment and still have leaders in positions that are not ready for leadership, not let alone having to make decisions using data analytics?
It doesn't make sense.
No, it
I mean,
doesn't.
that's a hard one to square off, right? I mean,
Yeah.
data is. Think about this. So I'm 50 years old, right? When I started my career in the kind of late 90s, the internet was only a baby.
Yeah.
Very few people had it at home, and if you did, it was dial up. And you fast forward to now, and people have all the data and information they want in a couple of taps, right? Here I am talking to you, and we're what, 3,500 miles apart, and
Yes.
it's instantaneous. You couldn't have done this, in the late 90s. Technology is making things easier for us. Right now, my one worry with technology, and particularly with the AI part of it, is that there's a threat that we could lose some of that human connection.
Yep.
I don't think we will, but there's a possibility there, right? And I think another issue is that there is so much data now that it's hard to discern what's real from what's not, what's true from what's lies. And we need people to be able to look at data sets, to look at statistics, to look at information and understand that, and know and be able to know that something is real and true. We can't say that right now. So we're dependent upon people's common sense to be able to look at something and decide for themselves whether that's real or not, because the technology isn't catching up quickly enough to be able to do that for us yet. We still need that human decision making. We still need that common sense, and sadly, common sense is not all that common. So
I've heard that
again,
before.
we have an issue. Yeah, we have a little bit of an issue, right? Now, I do think that AI is improving at a rapid rate, and it's going to get better, and we're going to get better outputs from it. But I don't think it can ever replace that human connection. I really don't.
I agree with you there, because my background is in human resources. So I'm an HR person, talent development, workforce development, and we have access to a lot of personal records. We have a lot of employee records, organizational files, and you can query up and ask databases for all types of information. But the kicker is, how do you use it? How do you a lot of organizations are bringing in soft skill classes such as data analytics 101, and but the one thing that just kind of always strikes me as odd is, are they bringing in this type of training and development just to check the box, or are they really trying to equip their employees with the right information to help maximize the performance of the organization? So I think it goes back to a leadership flaw that we're still kind of, there's a group, and I'm 54, so I understand that dial-up sound of the old internet. But the question is, if you were to take the 60, let's just say 65-year-old CEO, senior leader, then you take that next group, probably I would say, let's just say if he's 50 or 40, there's a group in there that are making some huge decisions that did not receive any kind of development. And a personal experience of mine was, I was terminated from an agency, and the leader showed no sympathy, no empathy, just showed nothing. But he has since then moved on to become a senior executive in an agency. So we are promoting and advancing those that are constantly making, I guess, bad decisions or negative impacts on people's lives, and we're not promoting those that we feel as though are aspiring leaders. We're not giving them the opportunity to to grow.
You started talking there about HR and the data that HR have. I want to start there, actually, because I think HR people functions have a massively important role here, because those are the people that can help us make the case, right? HR people are very passionate about people. That's why they do what they do, right? And that function, that people function, that HR function, people and culture function, as I see it being called now, is becoming much more strategic than it used to be. I mean, you will know that back in the 90s, it was a personnel department, and it was hiring and firing and the legal paperwork and stuff like that. And there's much more than that now. But I still think there's a ways to go for for HR leaders and people function leaders. And while progress is being made, they need to use that data that they have, building meaningful data sets from all of the data that they have in their databases to make the case for leadership development. Because I think human resources, more than any other department, understands the pain of poor retention rates. They understand the cost of poor engagement, because they see it every day. They're dealing with it every single day. So I think a big responsibility is on people function leaders to present CEOs with better business cases, to present them with data that says, here's something really meaningful. We need to do something about this. We need to invest in this. So if it's, if you've got a company and poor retention rates and poor engagement rates are costing them, say, $100,000 a year, for want of a better figure. If they spend 50,000 of those dollars on developing leaders, on developing people, and starting them early in their career, as opposed to trying to develop leaders who are already in their 50s, starting early, that's going to be a really sound investment. But it takes time for that investment to show a return. And I think this is another reason why senior people, CEOs and the like, are slow to invest in people development, are slow to invest in leadership development in a meaningful way, because the return takes time to see. It isn't quick. But I do think people leaders have a huge responsibility and potential for impact.
Yeah. And the other thing I've noticed too is, to your point you just made up, most of the organizations that I go in and I talk to, or even have been a part of, their coaching and mentoring doesn't start until around that mid to high level leader. So on a scale of, let's just say if the scale is a GS1 to a GS15, they're not getting really considered for leadership development, or I would say coaching and mentoring, until about the level 13.
Right.
And so you take the employee that's probably the 5 level or 6 level, they kind of, they may not actually, have long-term plans. But I think part of the problem is we don't know what their plans are. We haven't even helped them even sit down and to try to even develop a career plan, a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, because who knows, that may be the next great leader that we could be equipping with just over time in our organization. And we end up losing them because most new employees only stay in organizations 3 to 5 years. They're not staying 15, 20 years anymore.
No. And you know what, 3 to 5 years doing well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you haven't entertained them within about a year or so, or if they don't see the value in the organization, or if they're not seeing that the organization sees value in them, they're gone. They're gone.
Yep. And I love that young people are doing that now. I think that's fantastic. They're standing up for themselves. They're standing up for what they believe in, and so they should. I mean, if you're keeping people for 3 to 5 years in an organization, you're doing well. You're doing something right.
And
look, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, it takes one bad leader to influence that employee and push them out the door. Yep.
There's an interesting study. It's called the One Bad Apple study.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember who the scholar was. It'll come to me in a minute. But it was done in the University of Washington in the US. And essentially, one bad apple in a team can cost that team 40 to 60% in productivity. Now, if you've got that one bad apple, and that bad apple is a leader, that's a big cost. Right, that 40 to 60% is big, and unless something is done about that compounds, and you're losing people and you're losing money. All for something that could be simply fixed, right?
Yeah,
just by giving them some development, working with them, growing them, challenging them. I'm a big believer in doing hard things on purpose, and leadership development is hard, and it should be. But when you get people who are willing to do hard things to help better themselves, you get better people. You get better leaders. And I know of companies here that would be more old school companies. I'm thinking of one in particular. It's a client of mine, and they have a turnover in the region of 50 million euros a year. They've got 120 people or so, but they have a big cohort of people in that business who've been there 10 years or more, and they have a number of people in that business who've been there 30 years or more. Now, the two men who own that company have been active in running that company since the mid-70s. They get people. They understand relationships, and they look after people, and they grow people, and they bring them along, and they're good to them. And that's why people have stayed. We already have the evidence that when you look after people, they stay. But for some reason, we're not doing that anymore. It doesn't really make sense. I think Jack Welch actually has a bit of responsibility in this with his leadership style in the 80s with GE, and it was super aggressive, and that I don't think that would work now.
No, you're right. And that's, again, it goes back to, it's two things I heard in that, right? It goes back to, I know you know this, there's like 15 leadership styles right now. Mm-hmm. and most only know about 3 or 4, and so the some of the newer ones are, they're really talking about servant leader, they're talking about transformational leaders. But when you think about the concepts of transformational leaders, and then you look at the concepts of transactional leaders or situational leaders or authoritative leaders, who wants to be told what to do anymore? How about having a conversation saying, hey, okay, I'm going to still make the final decision, but let's collaborate on this and come up with the best way of doing it. What are your thoughts on this? Why is that so hard? I don't know.
I wish I could answer that, Edward. I really do.
Yeah.
And there's no shortage of good, solid leadership information out there.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's people doing some really, really good work putting out into the world around all the different types and styles of leadership. And we still have too many leaders who depend on that authoritarian type style, that commanding style, right? It works, but in a very small number of cases. Commanding authoritarian is really good in a crisis. It's useful then for a period, but it's always only short term. And I think for a lot of people, it's easy to be commanding, because they're still feeding into a kind of a stereotype. This is what a leader should be. A leader should be aggressive and strong and in charge. And you can still be in charge, and you can still be a strong leader without being aggressive. You can still hold people accountable without being aggressive. Actually, it's more impactful if you're not aggressive, right? Because when we get aggressive, we put people into a fear state, and people cannot perform well. They cannot perform at their best when they're in a fear state. But getting from that commanding, which is easy, to that more vulnerable, open, transparent, authentic, genuine style of leadership, and you can call that transformative leadership, servant leadership, situation leadership, whatever you like, but they're over here in this space. That leap is really, really scary for people who are just in this commanding style, because that's all they know. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard the term, if your only tool is a hammer, you'll see every problem as a nail.
I've heard that.
So if you only have commanding, that's all you can use, and you apply that to every situation, even though it's only a small minority of situations will benefit from that. I personally, I think it's inexcusable. If you're gonna accept the responsibility and the privilege and the honor of being given a position that leads other people, you have to do the work. There's no way around it. If you want to do that well, you have to do the work. End of story.
And the other part of that, Brian, is we will bring very well educated and smart people into our organization,
Mhm.
and we still want to tell them what to do. We won't even let them do their job because they're so used to being the hammer, you know.
I mean, yeah. And to go back to something you said earlier on, excuse me, this was an issue when we moved from pre-COVID into COVID, when you went from being in the office to working remotely. You had a lot of managers, people leaders who always wanted to tell people what to do. They were micromanagers. They wanted to control it. And when everything went online, it was much more difficult to control. So you got a whole sector of people here who went, neurotic is probably the kindest way I can put this, and constantly sitting on people who were working away at home.
Yeah.
Rather than checking in on them, they were checking on them and checking on them and multiple times a day. And that gets tiring when you're the person who's being checked on all the time.
I had a supervisor. He actually was a senior level supervisor. We were in a conference or something. I can't remember what it was. And we were talking about leadership development and training. And his comment was, so he was our senior executive was leading this portion of the conference. And so we had all senior leaders. They were all leaders at maybe your 14, 15 level. So all senior, very senior leaders, right? And we got to talking about, we saw our numbers decrease in training. So in-person training or even virtual training, we saw the numbers decrease. We had I think he was a 15, actually, I think he was. He basically stood up and said, this was his statement. I'm paraphrasing it, but this was his concept. He said, why would I send employees to training and development when I know that they're going to come back and leave the organization? And it just stumped all of us. We just sat there, and I raised my hand because I wanted to answer this question. And our senior executive was like, I know, I got this. And what he basically told him was, if that's what you're concerned with, then you're the wrong person to be a leader in this organization.
Bravo.
If you think that the employee is already going, if you feel as though the employee is going to leave the organization, 9 out of 10 times the employee mentally is already gone because they're working for you. Mm-hmm. And it got so quiet in the auditorium till it was just like, I don't believe he just said what he said about sending employees to training. And his excuse was, if he sent them to training, they would leave the organization when they came back. Mm. I was just dumbfounded.
Yeah, I think Richard Branson had a quote around that. Responding to a leader said, what if we train them and they leave? And the retort was, what if we don't and they stay?
Right.
I mean, even aside from that, Edward, I think one of the best employee retention strategies is development.
Yeah.
Right. And development in conjunction with them in a direction that they want to go, that they see value in, that's an incredible retention strategy. It works. It really works. And what you're doing there also is you're hopefully filling your succession pipeline, right? You're building more leaders if you start them early enough.
And you're making them feel valued.
Oh, absolutely.
Now we won't even talk about succession pipelines because there are a lot of organizations that do not have a succession pipeline. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of organizations, they phrase it as aspiring leaders, but they don't want to identify high performers because they feel as though it's a negative, it will be negatively impacting to those employees to other employees. So I would flip it on them and say, okay, well, let me ask you a question. Out of 100 employees, how many do you think want to be leaders? And they would make guesses, and I would say probably about 20%. 15% want to actually be leaders. So, and they're going above and beyond. They're high performers. They're doing all the job, right? You are giving them bonuses and you're giving them accolades and awards. So why wouldn't you put them or acknowledge that they are high performers and these are your aspiring leaders?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do that? And
It makes no
they are
sense.
very hesitant.
It makes no sense to not do that, right? Because you, as a leader, you want to set the standard, right? And if people can't see the standard, they can't be it. And we talk about meritocracy. I'm a big believer in meritocracy. It's got to be done right, but I'm a big believer in it. And if we're going to do that, we need to hold up the high performance and say, this is the standard we want everybody to get to. We'll support you to get there. We'll give you the training. We will give you the mentoring. We will provide an environment and a culture that will enable that. But this is the level we want to see people at. Here is the standard. And if we're not showing people the standard, we can't ever expect them to get there.
Right.
And that's unfair. We're taking away that opportunity from people to actually step up. It makes no sense.
Yeah. I think that's part of the reason that people leave, because they don't see the acknowledgement, or they don't see the organization showing the value in anything, rather than having these closed door conversations. Those people should, like you say, show them what the standard is, so they can achieve. They can look at it to achieve it. But something else I wanted you to talk a little bit about is one of your other keynotes is the most important clown. I think that's what you call it.
The most important clown I ever met.
Yep, clown I ever met. Yep. What is that about?
So that's a mental health story. Back in 2008, I had my first panic attack, and I thought I was having a heart attack, and I drove myself to the hospital. I tell this whole story, but I'll obviously shorten it here. Went to the hospital. I wasn't, and they told me, look, you had a panic attack. Are you particularly stressed at the moment? And suggested mindfulness and meditation. And of course, I nodded my head. And as I was walking out the door, I said, there's no way in hell I'm ever telling a soul about this. And I didn't for a while. But for the next 2 years, I had panic attacks almost every day. And I got so good at masking them. I could be sitting in a board meeting and having a panic attack, and you wouldn't know. So, I'd be feeling everything. And after a few minutes, I'd excuse myself, go to the bathroom, throw some cold water in my face, and go back to the meeting. Now, if you're doing this for 2 years, it gets tiring. And one morning I woke up and I said, nope, I got to go talk to somebody. I got to go ask for help. So I went to my GP, my doctor, and we had a good conversation. He was amazing, and I think people are amazing when you reach out. If you're struggling with a mental health issue, generally people are incredibly good. And my doctor suggested talk therapy. I did go on medication for a period as well, which helped. But in therapy, I learned that I had this other voice in my head, and ultimately I gave this voice a name and a character. So the voice in my head, the nasty voice, the asshole, his name is Oscar, and Oscar is a clown. So part of the therapy was this dissociation of that voice, so that I could observe it, and I could observe what this voice was saying. I could create that image in my head and observe what this character was doing. And Oscar became the most important clown I ever met, because over a period of time, we made friends again, and it was a very, very powerful experience. Now we still have an argument every now and again, and that's okay, because friends can have arguments, right? But Oscar is still very much a part of me, and I know that. But it was a really, really important piece of work with that therapist, and I'm a big advocate of people going to therapy. It's such a good thing to do for yourself. But that's where that keynote comes from. That's what that's about. And I talk a bit about the things I've done since, and the other things outside of therapy that have helped me, and the things that, that I experimented with and have tried that help me manage my day to day. Right. So anxiety will always be a part of me. I also have an ADHD brain, so the two of those things go hand in hand, right? And yeah, there's practical things I do every day that help me manage all of that. So that's what that keynote's about.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing that, because that's very important. It's very important.
It is.
And I think we are now getting into this age and time, not age, but time, that mental health, wellness, is important. And a lot of organizations, a lot of people are not able to talk about it.
Yeah.
And there are some things that has happened in my life as well. That I had some tragedy happen in my life, and I thought that for me, the most economical and feasible way out was to end it all. And that would take care of a lot of things. I wouldn't be here, but that would take care of a lot of things. And for the longest, to your point, for the longest, I didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about. I knew what got me to that situation, but as far as the process of processing it, I felt for years as though I was walking outside of my own body.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I know that feeling.
It took some time for me to, honestly, there are some things that I remember, like I'm starting to remember now, that I was seeing when I was outside of my body. I'm like, wait a minute, that's crazy. But yeah, it's for us to be talking like this now as men, we don't do it. It's just something we didn't do. And so now you throw all of that on to family, you throw all of that on to work, you throw all of that on to just being a man. And I call it leadership in chaos. How do you to me, I equate it to being in war. How do you maneuver everywhere you turn? It's almost like a landmine, and you still have to have that facade. I walked around. I used to tell people I cried on the inside. I didn't show emotions. So I want to applaud you for taking the necessary steps to get your life healed, and from where it was to where it is now, and understanding those triggers. That's what it's about. How do you understanding the triggers of what takes us to a certain place?
You know what? It's an ongoing process, Edward. Right, and this is something we'll work on until the day we die, and we should.
Yep.
But I heard a statistic recently, and it's horrific, to be honest. In the world today, 2 men commit suicide every minute.
Yeah.
Every minute. We've been talking for nearly 50 minutes. That's 100 men, right?
Yep.
Now, I say men for a reason, because men are less likely to talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's been, women are much, much better at expressing themselves, at expressing their emotions. And men are simply not. And it doesn't need to be that way. There was an MMA fighter, a guy called Paddy Pimblett. He's from Liverpool in England. And at a fight a couple of years ago, after the fight, a friend of his had died by suicide. And he spoke after the fight, and he spoke to men, and he said, your friends would much rather you if you cried on their shoulder than to have to go to your funeral. And I loved that. I think that's so true. So true. I know it's true for me. I would much rather somebody come cry on my shoulder than have to go to their funeral. It's and when you speak up, when you ask for help, people are so good. They
Yeah.
really are. People are so good. Just they want to help. But it is a very scary thing to do as a man.
Yeah.
It takes courage, you know. And if we can tell our stories, Edward, and there's plenty of people like us telling their stories. If we can tell our stories, well, the hope is that it gets through to somebody and they ask for the help they need. And you know what? It's worth it.
Yeah, it is. One of the things that I do is I went out for this agency that I work with. Um, Became a facilitator for suicide prevention and intervention, and it's a different way of providing a class. So it's in person, vice virtual or online, and the way the way I facilitated is a little different than the normal. Um, and it's the one thing I get from it is the way that we're teaching this class is more on um, providing safe space
Mm.
within the organization for people who may be contemplating or just having some issues. And the other part of it is, how do we integrate them back into the workplace if somebody within our organization um, has taken suicide, or if they were the ones who attempted the suicide, you know, how do you integrate them back into the organization? How do we
Mm.
keep them whole? And so that's been a really good, fulfilling, um, I guess, course to teach, because we're starting to see
Fantastic.
some leaders that are really they're really catching on, because again, I'm not saying that they were the asshole, but they just didn't they were just, I guess, didn't know that. And I don't know what word I want to use for it, because you brought up the point, we're all human.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I'm working for you in an organization, I have feelings and I have a family, and I hurt. And there are some things that may be going on at home that I'm trying not to bring in the office. Um, but you don't seem to have any kind of what word am I looking for? Any kind of intuition that I could be going through anything, because all you
Yeah.
focus on is the end result. So
Mm-hmm.
what about, what's my baseline? Am I a happy person all the time? Or did I come into the office a little sad today, or quiet?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think those are some of those important, traits and things that leaders have to be taught, just
I
to
agree.
not not just to go around to an employee's desk or call them. Like you say, I think you phrased it earlier. You said something like checking in, but just checking on them or something. I think you said
Mm-hmm.
it to where,
Yeah, the difference between checking in with somebody to see how they're doing versus checking
right,
on somebody to see if they're doing what they were told.
right. And that's huge. That's huge. So, I want to thank you, Brian, for coming onto the show. Um,
My
I think
pleasure.
we had some, I think we had some really good conversation, and some topics that could go, on and on and on for some time. So what I want you to do is just give some words of advice or wisdom to an inspiring leader, or a CEO that may be struggling with something within his organization. What would you say to them?
For the aspiring leader, I would say get to know yourself. Don't be afraid to connect with people. People are good, and if you want to lead them, if you want to have an impact on people, you need to be able to connect with them. I mean, a proper human connection. Remember, you're a human leading a human. And to a CEO that's struggling with something, you know, I know that CEO chair is big and it's lonely, or can feel lonely at least. But you've got a team around you, and you need to pull them into. And I'd say to the CEO, connect with them, be human leading a human, because I think That's what all of this leadership stuff comes down to: humans and humans. And if we start treating people like humans, regardless of their skin color, their creed, their preference, just treat them as a human, we can change the world of work. And I truly believe that. We've got a ways to go, but we'll get there. But yeah, I think it all comes back to human connection for me.
Brian, I can't sum it up even better. I think what you said is right on spot on. If we were to treat each other as human, then we would change the world instantly.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'd change the world instantly.
We would.
Yeah. Again, I want to thank you for coming on to the show. I think we had some great conversation, and I hope our listening audience will give us a high five and some comments on the topics that we had today. And as we always say, welcome to the Mosley Method Master Leadership Podcast, and we will see you next episode.
You've been listening to the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. Edward E. Mosley Jr. has 30 years of leadership experience and is an ICF credentialed leadership coach. And it's his passion to inspire leaders who can foster a safe space where they can empower their followers to take ownership of their roles and responsibilities while sparking collaboration and creativity. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But until then, find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edward E. Mosley Jr. To contact the show, send your emails to limitlessboundsteam@gmail.com. See you next time on the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast.